days in my life where what's pressing in my life can be a little distracting. A car breaking down, a flat tire. We know somebody had that happen to them this morning. That argument with your spouse or your parent or your friend. And it's not just when you come to church. It's when you go to work. There are times when I'm on my way to a meeting and there's something pressing happening in my life. And even though I go with good intentions to pay attention and to be fully present in the meeting, that thing in my personal life that's pressing is often distracting for what I'm trying to set my attention on. In my family this week, we've got a friend who got a stage 4 diagnosis. And so I'm here today with you, and I'm wanting to be here, and I want to be focused with you, but there are things in my life that can distract, if I'm honest. And it's no different for you probably when you're going through life and going to work or coming to church, that there are things that just happen and they get pressing on you, and you come with good intentions, and maybe you say, I want to worship, and I want to meet new people, and I want to engage, and I want to serve, and I want to encourage other people. I want to do all these things, and I have all these good intentions, but there's just this kind of fog that settles in, or this brick wall that's in front of you. And you would say, Chris, no matter how hard I try to get around it, how hard I try to get over it, how hard I try to go under it, it's just there, and I can't do anything with it but just focus on this very felt need. Can anybody relate with that? And it doesn't always have to be heavy. Sometimes it's like, I got a bad grade on that test, and I'm focused on it, and I want to put it away, but I'm distracted by it, or I've got to get these groceries bought because I've got 4 cakes to make this week. It doesn't have to be really heavy, medical, serious, but it can be. But there are smaller things that they're just pressing on our lives. And there's a story in Luke that we're going to look at today, Luke chapter 8. And I think that it illustrates kind of this idea that there are pressing felt needs that we all have. And when we have these felt pressing needs, it can detract or distract or keep us from experiencing something deeper that God may want for us. And so the story's found in Luke chapter 8. It's a pretty familiar story, so maybe you've heard of it before, but if not, we're going to read it together today. It says this in Luke 8, starting at verse 40. It says, "Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him." So Jesus has just been doing some other things, and he's coming back to this city, and there's this huge crowd that's like a welcoming party. And they're there. I kind of think of like when soldiers come back home and all their friends and family gather, and they're there to just welcome them off the ship or off the planes. That's kind of what's going on. They're so excited to see Jesus. And then it says in verse 41, "Then a man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue," so he's a public figure, "came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying." How old was she? 12. So this public figure throws himself at Jesus' feet. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. So it was a welcoming party, but now it's like this famous guy's walking through the crowd, and everybody's trying to get close and get a selfie with him and snap a picture and just reach out and touch. Everybody's trying to get close, so the tightness of this crowd is just centering on Jesus. And it says this, "And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. How many years? 12 years. But no one could heal her. Other manuscripts and other accounts of this say that she had spent everything she had on doctors trying to get well, but could not. No one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. 'Who touched me?' Jesus said. When they all denied it, Peter said, 'Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you.' But Jesus said, 'Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me.' Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. So you've got this man who falls at Jesus' feet. Now you've got this woman who falls at Jesus' feet, and she's trembling, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But she came and fell at his feet, and trembling, in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now, this story is sandwiched in a bigger story because we started with Jesus being welcomed by these crowds, and this public figure, this man named Jairus, comes and throws himself at Jesus' feet, which is a sign of like, I'm humbling myself before you, saying that you're greater than me. So this public figure, who was probably well respected at the time, came and threw himself down and said, "Jesus, I've got a daughter who's 12 years old and she's sick and dying. Can you come and heal her?" And so Jesus agrees to go. And as he's going, this woman kind of gets inserted into the story. And she's been bleeding and sick for 12 years, which is the same age as the girl. So the woman's been bleeding and sick for as long as the other girl's been alive. And we read that story, and she presses through the crowd and reaches out and touches Jesus. And he kind of stops the whole thing and says, "Who touched me?" And Peter is always speaking up and rarely getting it right. He's like, well, after they all denied it, they're first like, "Well, no, it wasn't me, Jesus. It wasn't me." After all that, Jesus is like, "Look, somebody touched me. We got to figure out who it is." So then Peter speaks up and says, "Look, everybody's touching you. Everybody's pressing in because they want a piece of Jesus. Everybody, Lord." And Jesus is like, "No, it wasn't just a touch. It was a touch where power has gone out." And then when you fast forward and you keep going in the story, you see Jesus go on to this man's house. And while this whole interaction is going on, one of his servants shows up and says, "Hey, look, she's already passed away. Don't trouble the teacher any longer." And Jesus looks and says, "Hey, don't be afraid. Just believe." And so he goes on to the house, even though word has already gotten back that she's passed away. When they arrive at Jairus' house, the people are singing songs and mourning, and there's this commotion going on because this young 12-year-old girl has passed away. And Jesus looks at him and says, "She's just asleep." And then they're like, "No, Jesus, we know the difference between someone who's sleeping and someone who's dead. She's not just asleep. She's gone. She's dead." And Jesus just kind of empties the room and takes the parents in, and they go into this room, and he says, "Child, little girl, get up." And he helps her up. And he tells everybody, "Hey, don't tell everybody." And there's other reasons for that. But he had just healed a woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years, and now he's healed this daughter. And so throughout this whole story is healing. This woman is sandwiched in this kind of bigger story. And in her desperation, she turned to Jesus. And she was healed. Think about it just for a minute. In her desperation, this woman was sick, and in her desperation, she turned to Jesus and she was healed. And this was not just I turned to Jesus and I prayed. No, there was a crowd that was crushing Jesus. I mean, I'm sure the disciples are like bodyguards trying to keep the people away, and he's walking through, and this crowd is crushing this Jesus. And this woman who's been bleeding for about 12 years, can you imagine what that's like? I mean, she's probably weak. She's probably not the strongest of women. And she presses through this crushing crowd just to get within an arm's reach of Jesus and reach out and touch him. This is a move of total desperation. God, I've looked everywhere else. I've tried to make it happen on my own. I've tried to pay for it, and people have tried to help me, but nothing's been successful. And I've heard of this man named Jesus who can still do miracles and who can do something incredible. And so I'm going to work and press and fight and push my way through this crowd just to get within arm's reach of this man named Jesus. I don't need a conversation with him. I just need to touch him. And she does. And she's healed. What do you need healing for? what are you in need of today? My hope for this service is that we in some way could take the same form of faith of this woman and begin to press in faith and in prayer. And so one of the things that we're going to do, we're going to kind of dive in for a few moments. And we're going to have a time of prayer, legitimately praying for God to heal. Because there's things in our lives that are pressing, and there's things in our lives that are right here. And there's a bigger part of the story that we're going to get to in a few minutes. There's a bigger thing happening that we're going to get to. But right here for this woman, she's desperate and in need of physical healing. And so she presses through to obtain that from the Lord. So what are you in need of? Is it a physical healing? Is there something physically going on that you would just say, Chris, if I'm honest, I just need God to move? I've tried everything else. We've gone to all the doctors. We've spent all the money. And we just need God to move, Chris. But maybe it's not physical. Maybe it's emotional. Chris, you don't know the pain I've experienced. You don't know the past. You don't know the places that I've been. And I've tried everything. And I just need a touch from Jesus this morning. Or maybe you're here with your spouse. Or maybe you're not here with your spouse. There's some issues going on in your marriage. You say, Chris, my marriage needs healing. There's some brokenness. There's some things that need to be fixed, and we're trying to do the right things. We're going to talk to the people. We're trying to do all we know to do, but we need a touch from God. Or maybe you're here and you say, I want to do those things, but I'm scared, or I'm afraid, or my spouse is unwilling, and we just need a touch from God. We want to pray with you today. Maybe you're here and you say, it's not a marriage relationship, but there is a relationship. A friend, a family member, a coworker, and we just need God to move in that situation. Or maybe you're here today and you say, Chris, it's kind of none of those things, but there's some financial crises going on in my life. And it's very pressing. It's all I can think about. It's what I think about when I lay down at night. It's what I think about when I wake up in the morning. And I'm trying to do what's right, or I don't really know what to do, but I just need God to move. We want to pray for all these things. And if you're here and you say, Chris, I'm not really dealing with that, but I'm dealing with this issue that I can't put away. This struggle, this addiction, this substance that it just keeps drawing me back in, and I want to be free, and I'm trying to get away from it, but it's hard for me to believe that I can live my life without this thing. We want to pray for you that God would set you free, whether it's a substance or looking at things we don't need to be looking at on phones or devices, or whatever that addiction, whatever that might be. I believe that God wants to heal you. I believe it deep in my soul. And so we've arranged this service. We've ordered this service to have a time of prayer. I believe Jesus can heal you and make you well. And so we're going to spend some time praying for that. And so the band's going to come, and they're going to lead us in about 2 songs. And I'm going to be in the back, and I think Pam's going to be in the back, and Corey's going to be in the back. And there's an altar set up over there. There's another one over here. And if you're in that place where you just say, Chris, I just need God to move, then we want to pray with you. We just want to pray and believe, God, would you move? Would you deliver? Would you set free? Would you bring healing? Would you bring whatever they need in this moment? God, we still believe that you're a miracle working God. We still believe that you are in this place. And if you're in this room, Lord, then we want to reach out and press in faith and prayer and desperation and say, God, would you Would you just move? And we see in the story that he's willing. And we see in the story that he has the power over sickness and death. So we're going to press in faith and call on this miracle-working God to move in us today. This woman presses through and receives her healing, her physical healing. But there's something more going on in the story here that we need to address. Now, the issue of blood, the physical issue that she had, is no minor thing. It's a major thing. 12 years she was seeking a healing, seeking someone who could help her, someone who could deliver her. But there's something deeper going on. I mean, just consider for a moment, the time period is not like we live in. So for her being a woman in this time period, she's already facing difficulty there because of the culture she lives in. But then you add on top of that she's got this physical condition, and that makes things even worse. But it's worse than you might think it is. Her physical condition was not debilitating. She was able to walk around. She was able to move because she pressed through this crowd we see in this story. But her condition was socially devastating. It's not that the physical condition wasn't important, it was. Not only did she have the physical condition, the physical ailments, but she had no one to care for or comfort her. Why didn't she have anybody, Chris? She didn't have anybody because she was unable to have anyone. According to the ceremonial laws of the day, she was unclean. And when the bleeding would stop, then she had to wait 14 days before she could re-enter and engage with society. So physically, maybe it wasn't debilitating. She didn't die from this issue. She was living with it, coping with it. But socially, understand, she was isolated and all alone. We don't know her name. Her story is not even her story. Her story is sandwiched between the story of a synagogue ruler named Jairus, who has this daughter. And it seems like Jesus is on his way to take care of that need when this woman's story surfaces. So understand, she had no one. Have you ever been in that place where you just feel like, I've got no one? I can remember a time in college where it wasn't exactly like this, but I moved 8 hours away from home to go to college and play baseball up in Tennessee. And, Becca said last week, I've always been the extrovert and love being around the crowd scene. And it was going pretty well for me. Pretty early on at college, I was having some success in practices on the baseball field, was having some successes socially. It was going pretty well. But about a month into college, I tore a ligament in my throwing arm. We did rehab for 6 weeks, didn't get any better. Ended up with a surgery. I'd always been really healthy, never had any broken bones, never had any surgeries. And my first semester of college, 8 hours away from family, left me unable to do the thing that I love to do the most. And that alone would have been enough, but the surgery happened in December. In February, in my second semester, I faced a series of illnesses that kept me sick all semester that resulted in another surgery. And so there I am, 8 hours away from home, having 2 surgeries. I've always been pretty healthy, and I feel like I don't have anyone to turn to. This woman had no one. Maybe she was someone of notoriety. Maybe she had some money and she tried to get help and she spent it all. And so that left her empty and alone with nothing, no recognition, no credibility, and no name. And get this, even turning to Jesus was not kosher. For her to turn to Jesus, understand what would have happened. If she touched anybody, they were unclean as well, just from physical contact. So this woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, who is unclean by the standards of the ceremonial laws of the day, presses through this crowd. Okay, it's not like they just part and she walks to Jesus. No, she's pressing through. So every person she touches is now unclean. And she reaches out and touches Jesus, which would essentially make him unclean. For 7 days, he would have to remove himself from society until his purification rituals were complete, so then he could come back. Not only Jesus, but the ruler of a synagogue. She's going to make all of these people unclean. So turning to Jesus is not even like acceptable. And yet she does it. Because that's how desperate she is for healing. And so she comes to Jesus when Jesus stops the parade and says, hey, someone touched me and I need to figure out. And he's doing this because what could have stayed private and remained private, he wanted to bring public for one very clear reason. But Jesus says, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed. Think about how many years she went unnoticed. Think about how many years she slid through the cracks. Nobody called. Nobody stopped in to check on her. That's the life of this woman for 12 years. Seeing that she could not go unnoticed, she came trembling and fell at his feet. Why was she trembling? Because how Jesus interprets her actions will determine everything for her. I don't know customarily if she could have been killed for this act, but she might have. She was certainly sealing her fate to be completely isolated and alone because everybody there would now be unclean and furious at this woman. And so she comes to Jesus and is trembling because she doesn't know what's about to happen. And in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Think about that kind of public gathering. I had to tell not only Jesus, but everything that kept me unclean. Like, imagine walking here and I were to say, hey, Philip, we're going to put all of your things on screen to tell everybody of why you should stay away from Jesus and be kept away from the crowds. Imagine that moment. And she just began to lay it all out, trembling in fear, but knowing she's desperate, and this is the only way that she could get any relief. And so she tells of everything and how she had instantly been healed. Then he said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. This woman realized I can no longer go unnoticed, even though she was unnoticed in life. And Jesus saw the unnoticed. Jesus noticed the unnoticed and gave her peace. Peace, what does that really do? Jesus, the way he interprets this behavior is huge. He offers her peace. He says there's some interaction between faith and God's response, and that's healed you. But it's not just healing that Jesus is interested in. He wants to give her peace. So where she was formerly restricted, she now has access. Where she was formerly isolated and all alone, she now has community and family. And where she formerly worked to find healing for herself, God had given her peace. This peace is not just an emotion. This peace means that her life is now in complete order. And she is welcomed back into the community of the kingdom of God. You see, what she thought she needed was physical healing. And Jesus healed her. She reached out and touched, and it says that power went through him, that God chose to heal her. It wasn't like involuntarily. God healed this woman, but that's not all he was interested in doing. What he was interested in doing, because she could have been healed, and she could have walked away, and it could have been very private, and nobody would have ever known. But no, Jesus chose in this moment to take a private encounter and make it public so that everyone would know. This woman is given peace and is welcomed back in to the community of the kingdom of God. This is a picture of the gospel. And what it tells us is that no matter how unclean you feel, no matter how set apart and isolated you may feel, no matter how lonely and low you may feel, God's grace is greater than all of those things. His grace is greater than all of those things, and he offers peace to welcome us back in. There's a strange correlation between her faith and God's response. But what happens at the end of the story is God gives her peace. You see, God doesn't want to just heal you physically or emotionally. He doesn't just want to heal your marriage or your relationships. He doesn't just want to set you free from addiction so that you can just live through life. God wants to give you peace. He wants to set everything in your life in order as it should be, according to his kingdom, where your deepest needs, which are found in worshiping him and relationship with him and relationship with other people, are met. He wants to meet those needs. So put your faith in God. Because sure, he can heal you physically, but he will give you peace. He will forgive you. He will welcome you back into his family. And he will set you on the path in his kingdom that brings glory to him and peace to you.